أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله العلي العظيم حمدا يجعلنا من الحامدين الواصلين فإن الوصول إليه سبحانه خير من كل سعادة ونعيم والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين والواصل إليه وصلا ذاتيا وجوديا سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. So, we are picking up where we left off after a long time, and we left off in the fifth chapter, as Marmura calls them, or al-Fasl, which is usually rendered as sections, so section 5 or chapter 5. Of course, from al-Maqalatul Ula, the first discourse, what Marmura calls book 1, from the Ilahiyat of the Kitab al-Shifa, the metaphysics of the healing or the cure. Now, the last time we had a class on the Shifa, we actually began talking about this chapter. So we've already gone into it, but that was quite a while ago. And it's a little bit discontinuous, if that's the right word, somewhat jarring if we, jump right back in where we left off. So I'm just going to start back at the beginning, but we'll be able to go a little bit faster, but I do think that it's all right to revisit these things. Yeah. So earlier, before you all arrived, the observation was made that this chapter, this section, just seems like his version, in other words, Ibn Sina's version of Badahatul Wujud. And of course, the term Badahatul Wujud, or the self-evident nature or character of being or existence, was a doctrine which was first espoused and defended at length, of course, by Mullah Sadra. And just for your reference, you should know that the text in which he spent the most time discussing this question of Badahatul Wujud, Asalatul Wujud, and Asalatul Wujud in particular, along with other things, is the Kitab al-Mashāʿir, which is a very short book, and it's really a great summation of his teachings and is worth studying. There are 2 existing English translations. None of them are very good. One is by Sayyid Hussein Nasr under the editorship of Ibrahim Kalin, who's a student of Nasr, and it's also published in the same series as the Metaphysics of the Healing, the English translation by Michael Marmura. So that's the Hussein Nasr one. I think that one is an example of a particularly bad translation. Then there was one which was done years ago by Parviz Muravej, under the title The Metaphysics of Mullah Sadra, published by the Society for the Study of Islamic Philosophy and Science, New York, and the Institute for Cultural Studies in Tehran. So when was that? Let's see. This is an old one.
Is this also a dual language?
1992, and both of them are dual language editions. Yeah, so neither of them really is great, and the Parviz Murawij one is also very badly produced in terms of a book, just, the style, the font, and so forth. But those are side considerations. I'm really just interested in the translation. Yes, you may have a look at those. So that's just a footnote or a side note. So is this really, is this fasl, the 5th section, the 5th chapter, really a kind of instance of the doctrine of Bada'at al-Wujud, or the fundamental, how do we say it? Sorry, not the fundamental, the self-evident character of being, the indefinability of being. No, there's a lot of things going on in this section. So today, I think to make everything a lot more streamlined, we've had problems in the previous classes between this edition and that edition. I'm just going to stick to Marmura.
So, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
When we discuss the term Badahatul Wujud,
Yes.
the concept already existed before Mullah Sadra. Are we saying that this term was first used by Mullah Sadra, or the concept was dived into in depth at first?
He dives into it in great depth, and then of course he's more interested in establishing Asalatul Wujud. So Badahatul Wujud wasn't really an issue.
It wasn't really
a disputed thing before. I mean, there were people who thought that you could define wujud. You know, people like Fakhruddin al-Razi, he defends some sort of, definition, and that's dealt with by Nasiruddin al-Tusi in the very first proposition of the Tajreed. At any rate, so we'll be looking at Michael Marmura's edition, and Fasl 5, or what he calls Chapter 5, extends from pages 22 to 29, and he divides them into 27 paragraphs sequentially numbered from 1 to 27. If you are using the Cairo edition, that's pages 29 to 37. If you are fortunate enough to have the Hamid Naji Isfahani edition, that's pages 144 to 185, and that's a lot of pages because there's all sorts of commentaries. And then later within that book, there's also a summary called Aun Ikhwan al-Safa, and that summary extends from pages 282 to 285. So now we've covered everything. All right, we've covered all possible really good editions that people may have access to. So now we can begin. So the answer is no, this isn't really Ibn Sina's attempt to put forward some sort of a doctrine of Badahatul Wujud, or the self-evident character of being. He does talk about that. That's the opening sentence. But there's much more going on in this section. I have tried to make a list. I have made a list, in which I have tried to cover all of the separate topics which are dealt with here. And I've tried to put this in order, but I did this in a bit of a hurry. So we'll see if I've gotten the order right, but let me just run through my list. So in this section, Ibn Sina wishes to deal with a number of issues, according to my count, 8 in all. The first is the relationship between metaphysics and logic, or to be more exact, the relationship between ontology and logic. That's sort of implied or alluded to. He doesn't seem to have a separate, shall we say, paragraph on that, but it is implied and alluded to in the opening paragraphs. Number 2, how the first point which I just mentioned, the relationship between ontology and logic, how that points to the fact that being cannot be defined. Axiomatically speaking, for Ibn Sina, being or existence is a primitive notion. That is to say that if you have any kind of a system of axioms, you have any sort of if you have any sort of a structured account of metaphysics, then being is a primitive notion. He introduces also he also talks about number 3. He also wishes to establish the concomitant character of being with thingness. In other words, existence or being is synonymous, is coextensive with thingness, while not being synonymous. So the two are not synonyms, but they are coextensive. They have the same extension. So mawjudiyya always goes with shay'iyya. To be an existing thing always means that it is a thing. You see? To be an existent means it is a thing. To be a thing is to be an existent. So that brings us to... then he just sort of introduces the notion of quiddity. very briefly, and then he goes to the idea of the non-existent, al-ma'dum. That's number 5. So number 4 is the introduction of the notion of quiddity. Number 5 is the non-existent, al-ma'dum is not a thing. And number 6, Ibn Sina rejects the Mu'tazili doctrine of the hal, but again he never mentions the Mu'tazila by name. He doesn't, and in fact when we say the Mu'tazila we mean certain Mu'tazilis. We mean Abu Hashim and Abu Ali al-Jubba'i and others, and this has been already dealt with in our class on the Tajdeed al-I'tiqad, but suffice it to say that it was a doctrine, the doctrine of the hal, or the intermediate ontological state, which was associated with some Mu'tazili mutakallimun, theologians.
Sorry, what were the two names that you presented?
The two Jubba'is. They're called al-Jubba'iyan. Abu Hashim and Abu Ali, and they're all and because they're associated with them with Abu Hashim, it's called the Bahshamiyya as well. They're also called al-Bahshamiyya. So 6 was the rejection of intermediate ontological states. The 7th, and again I may have got this out of order. We'll see when we actually go through it. But for now, number 7, the indefinability of the terms necessary, possible, and impossible. In other words, the indefinability of al-wajib, wal-mumkin, wal-mumtana'. We dealt with this in the previous class earlier in the week on Tajdeed al-I'tiqad. So the terms necessary, possible or contingent, and impossible cannot be defined because they're all involved in the definition of each and lead to circularity. Now, number 8 is an interesting one. It's my last one. I said there were 8 in my list. And that's the repudiation of the bringing back into existence of the non-existent. Butlanu i'adat al-ma'dum. You see? So when we go through, I don't think we will add to this list. I think I got them all.
Repeat the 8th one.
Let's hope we got them all, but maybe the order will change, so you may want to renumber or reorder. Number 8 is repudiation. The 8th and final issue is the repudiation of the bringing back into existence of the non-existent. Butlanu i'adat al-ma'dum. Okay? Now I'm just going to say that 8th and final issue is connected with, anyone want to guess?
Resurrection.
The bodily resurrection. So there's plenty of room here for discussion when we get to the Q&A part. So let's go forward now. So we're on page 22, and I should point out that the numbering of the English and the Arabic is the same because it's a dual language edition. You have page 22 English facing page 22 Arabic. All right? So the first thing that he says here, and I don't think we're going to read through all of this word by word, but we'll you know what we can do? We'll go paragraph by paragraph. And I think we can probably get through all of that today if we don't read every single word. All right, but if you have any questions on anything in the paragraph, you should ask, whether it's the Arabic or the English. So the first thing he says, فَنَقُولُ إِنَّ الْمَوْجُودَ وَالشَّيْءَ وَالضَّرُورِ مَعَانِيهَا تَرْتَسِمُ فِي النَّفْسِ ارْتِسَامًا أَوَّلِيًّا. Okay. Now, he says that the ideas, this is how he's translating it here. Ideas refers to ma'ani. The ideas of the existent, the thing, and the necessary are impressed in the soul in a primary way. ليس ذلك الارتسام مما يحتاج إلى أن يجلى بأشياء أعرف منها. So he is saying that this impression in the soul does not require, as he says here in the English translation, better known things to bring it about.
They're the primary axioms.
They're the primary or primitive notions. Now notice he's got existent here, and thing, and necessary.
Is he saying?
And, yeah, so this points already in the opening sentence, as he does in the unwan, in the title. The title is on indicating the existent, the thing, and their first division, wherewith attention is directed to the object sought. So for him, already in the first sentence and in the very title, although in the title he doesn't have the word daruri or necessary, but he does have mawjud and shay. So he says that the existent or the existing thing, mawjud, and shay, thing, and daruri, all of these can't be defined. And of course later he will talk about al-wajib, but here he says al-daruri. So it seems that at least in these usages, daruri and wajib refer to the same. Okay? Were you going to say something, Bilal?
Oh no, it was along the you.
Okay.
So ad-daruri is referring towards wajib al-wujud over here.
Well, it's
or could it be daruri in
the
sense of badihi and self?
No, it's daruri, anything which is necessary. It's not necessary. Look at that. Not necessarily the necessary being God. Because something can be necessary, it can be wajib, but it's what you call wajib bil ghayr, if it's other than God.
Like ممكن الوجود is wajib.
Yeah, so something, if it exists, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah? So if you have an existing thing, then it is existent by virtue of any number of causes. And here, of course, we are going to focus on the efficient cause. And it's that efficient cause that brings it about and makes it become. Yeah? So he says that at the very beginning. Now, he goes on to introduce what he says is the category of assent. فإنه كما أن في باب التصديق مبادئ أولية. So he says that just as, in other words, this situation of the terms existent and thing and necessary being intuitively obvious or constituting a kind of metaphysical minimum, a metaphysically intuitive minimum that everyone has access to, that every human being has. This is similar, he says, to what we have in the category of assent. Now, when he says fi bab at-tasdiq, obviously he's alluding to logic. So in logic, of course, we talk about at-tasawwur wa at-tasdiq. And tasawwur is simple apprehension, and tasdiq is judgment, although here he's calling it assent. So in the area of at-tasdiqat in logic, or the second, what is called the second act of the mind, at-tasdiq or judgment or assent, you have certain fundamental laws of thought which are primitive. That is to say, they are primary and they're absolutely necessary. Excuse me.
Sorry, my apologies.
So just as in tasdiqat you have certain primitive or absolutely basic notions, so similarly you have the same situation in ontology. That is what he is saying. And those fundamental laws of thought in the category in what is called assent or judgment in logic, of course, it is the law of non-contradiction. So the fundamental laws of thought in logic, just quickly, are the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of excluded middle.
And that's what he's referring to when he says these.
Yes, these are of course called, this law of non-contradiction is al-Qadaya. If someone does not accept the law of non-contradiction, you can't really have a rational discussion with them.
And is there what is the Arabic term for the law of non-contradiction?
Yeah, that's a good question. What is it called in Arabic? Isn't it tanaqud?
Imtina' tanaqud.
Well, it depends on what you mean. So if they say that you can't have a coincidence of contradictories, so they'll say, how do they say it in Arabic? Ijtima'a.
اجتماع النقيضين.
النقيضين is محال and yeah.
اجتماع النقيضين.
Okay. So let's stay on topic because we're pressed for time today. So I'm not sure
Right?
that's what I remember from Arabic terminology for that, but you can follow up on that. Right, so then in the second paragraph, so in the first he introduces this. All right, and then he makes a comparison with the second act of the mind or judgment in logic. Then in the second paragraph, he makes a comparison with the first act of the mind, or what he says here, conceptual matters. Marmura says, similarly in conceptual matters, كذلك في التصورات أشياء هي مبادئ التصور. Excuse me. Similarly, in conceptual matters, there are things which are principles for conception that are conceived in themselves. If one desires to indicate them, such indications would not in reality constitute making an unknown thing known, but would merely consist in drawing attention to them or bringing them to mind through the use of a name or a sign, which in itself may be less known than the principles, but which for some cause or circumstance happens to be more obvious in its signification. In other words, he's saying that in the area of concepts, in the area of simple apprehension, there are certain things which are just extremely well known. They're so well known that either you don't need to define them or you can't define them, because you can't come up with something more. You cannot come up with a concept more known or better known, than the thing you're trying to define. It might be that thing is better known to a person, and then you'll use that word to explain that. So, for example, yesterday I was playing chess with my son, and he said, "What's another word for draw?" And I said, "Well, there's tie." Most people would say, "Oh, well, it's a tie." But you can also say it's a draw. And then he's saying, is there something else? I was trying to think. I said, I can't think of that one. And he said, what about stalemate? And I said, yeah, I suppose that would also work. So that's an example of where he just wanted another word. But the situation is well understood, I suppose. But of course, Ibn Sina is trying to say that there are some things which are the very basis for concept formation, and that are conceived of in themselves. And wujud is one of these. And in fact, wujud is the basis of all concept formation. But he would say, again, that things like the term necessary, this is going to come later, impossible, contingent, also are indefinable, because you will end up with circularity. The three terms are so intertwined and interrelated with one another that you can't get away from them. And the same applies to thing, although in Arabic the word thing and mawjud are not synonymous. Being a thing, even that phrase right there, being a thing, is intimately tied with existence. And for something to exist is intimately tied with thingness. You see how even I can't get around it when I want to say it in English. Being a thing is intimately tied up with existence. If a thing exists, it is intimately tied. You can't get around it. So even though that they aren't synonymous, they are co-extensive. So then he wants to elaborate on this further in paragraphs 3 and 4. So in paragraph 3 he says, if then such a sign is used, the soul is awakened to the fact that such a meaning is being brought to mind in the sense that it is the intended meaning and not another, without the sign in reality having given any knowledge of it. So when people define, or they try to define existence or wujud, and they say wujud is the affirmed in itself, that's a definition. I mean, it's very weird, but maybe that helps you understand it. For the average person, if you say if you say for the average person that the existing that al-mawjud means al-thabit al-ayn, the affirmed in and of itself. This comes up in the Tajreed, in the very opening of the Tajreed. The Tajreed al-I'tiqad Nasir ad-Din al-Tusi says that, if you try and define wujud as a thabit al-ayn, and al-adam as al-manfi al-ayn, or alladhi yumkin an yukhbar anhu, and the opposite of that, it doesn't get you anywhere. It results in circularity. So to define wujud or the mawjud as the affirmed in and of itself, and adam to be the opposite of that, just leads to some sort of a vicious circle. Now, it might be that such a designation is better known to someone. So whatever you have to do to get your point across, you come up with some sort of a term that maybe is better known to the person, but it doesn't constitute a real definition. There will always be some kind of circularity. Obviously, when we say definition, we mean in the strict sense used in logic. He also says that we can't have this situation because if every conception, this is paragraph 4, وَلَوْ كَانَ كل تصور يحتاج إلى أن يسبقه تصور قبله لذهب الأمر في ذلك إلى غير النهاية أو لدارة. If every conception were to require that another conception should precede it, then such a state of affairs would lead either to an infinite regress or to circularity. So even from a logical point of view, we are compelled to acknowledge that there has to be some absolutely basic, some absolutely primitive notion which is involved in every concept. Otherwise, it would lead to an infinite regress or to circularity. Okay. So he implies that there is some kind of a hierarchy here. Now, in the comments of Mullah Sadra on this, this also comes up a little bit later when he talks about priority and posteriority, or taqaddum wa ta'akhur. It comes much later in the section. He talks about a kind of tashkik, and he goes to great pains to talk about the difference between his notion of tashkik al-wujud, or the analogical or amphibologous nature of being, according to his elaboration, and that of the peripatetics or the masha'iyun. And this too we covered already in one of the classes on the Tajreed al-I'tiqad. Okay, so just by way of footnote here, it is important, and I think I've said this before, but it can't be repeated often enough. The first two maqsads of the Tajreed al-I'tiqad are a presentation of a Masha'i philosophy. And obviously this Masha'i philosophy is going to be found in the works of the great Masha'i Ibn Sina, right? So these kind of peripatetic doctrines are going to be found obviously in the Shīʿah and in the Isharat, the remarks and admonitions, and of course Nasir ad-Din al-Tusi was a commentator, great commentator on the remarks and admonitions. So now, in the 5th paragraph, Ibn Sina is talking about how some things have a higher claim to be conceived of in and of themselves. That's tantamount to saying that some things have a higher claim to exist than others. So some things have more existence than others. So he says, Kal mawjud wa shay al-wahid, the one thing and others, wa ghayruhu. So it's interesting that here you've got the term mawjud in Arabic, the existent thing, or sorry, just the existent, and then you have ash-shay al-wahid, preceded by waw, wa shay al-wahid. So ash-shayu al-wahid, the one thing. So not only is he using the term thing, but he's also bringing in the term one. So he hasn't said this, explicitly, but it's an implication here. It's an allusion an allusion to the fact that unity or one is also coextensive with being. So you have musawaqatul al-wujud wa shay'iyya, and you have musawaqatul wujud wal wahda. So wujud is coextensive with thingness, and wujud is coextensive with unity as well. So he says that for this reason, none of these things can be shown by a proof totally devoid of circularity or by the exposition of better known things. So he's just going on the same line of reasoning. He's saying that because these things are ontologically basic and primitive, you cannot define them without introducing circularity. And so he says, hence, whoever attempts to place in them something as a defining constituent falters. As, for example, one who says it is of the existence true nature to be either active or acted on. So that's another definition of mawjud, which you come across in the literature, in the philosophical and theological literature. Yeah. So he's referring to how the person falters. He says, وَقَعَ فِي اضْطِرَابٍ, and that's كَمَنْ يَقُولُ إِنَّ مِنْ حَقِيقَةِ الْمَوْجُودِ أَنْ يَكُونَ فَاعِلًا أَوْ مُنْفَعِلًا. So, to say that it is of the reality, how does he say the English here? He says it's of the existence, so haqiqa is true nature. It is of the existence true nature to be either active or acted on. So, أن يفعل or أن ينفعل are in the generally accepted sequence and order of the 9 accidents. They are accidents 8 and 9. So he says that this is really a strange way to try and define, and he says, the average person would never understand what this means, and he says that even myself cannot understand what this means without some process of reasoning, without some argument. He says by way of syllogism, because obviously you have to explain that there's something called a substance, in other words, jawhar, and that these jawahir, these substances, are subject to various accidents, and then you go through the list of the accidents and you explain what these accidents are, and then you see, okay, so this is, if you have any sort of existing thing in the external world, then it's going to be subject to these kind of accidents of place, position, time, quantity, time, etc. All of those accidents. So that's a pretty long paragraph. That's paragraph 5. Then paragraph 6. The case is similar with somebody's statement. The thing is that about which it is valid to give an informative statement. إن الشيء هو الذي يصح عنه الخبر. That's what Nasiruddin al-Tusi says. الذي يمكن أن يخبر عنه. So he says this is the same. You get in the same situation if you try and define mawjud as that regarding which some sort of statement can be made. In other words, this too just involves some level of circularity. And he goes through the different terms. So, for example, ma or alladhi in Arabic. Ma would be a whatever. Alladhi is that which, and that which implies in English some sort of a verb, that which is or that which is not. So locutions such as ma, alladhi in Arabic, ash-shay, they all imply being or are coextensive with it in some way.
In the sense that they would never be used for anything except that it is existing.
Ma or alladhi must refer to something which exists, whether fil a'yan or fil adhan, whether in the external world or in the mind. So again, he keeps going on and on with this. So in paragraph 6, we finished that. So paragraph 7, he continues on with this, saying that the best you can say about such definitions or attempts at defining are that they're just exchanging one expression or word with another, and the expression which is exchanged may perchance be better known to the one being addressed. That's the best you can say about such attempts at definition. And to that extent, they are useful. If the person doesn't know the one word or the one expression, you introduce the expression which is known or understood by that person. Okay, here it's instructive to go to, he has a footnote, the Marmura footnote. Marmura has a footnote here, so if you go to the notes at the back, book 1, chapter 5, where is this? This is page 386, note 5. First, you have to see what the footnote is applying to. So in paragraph 8, he says, moreover, we say the meaning of existence and the meaning of thing are conceived in the soul and are two meanings, whereas the existent, the established, and the realized are synonyms. We do not doubt that their meaning has been realized in the soul of whoever is reading this book. So he wants to write a footnote here for the word meanings. Now in Arabic, it's wahuma ma'nayan. Okay? So what does it say on page 386, footnote 5, near the bottom of the page? For Avicenna, existence is a necessary concomitant of the thing, but is not identical with it. I already said this earlier. Mm-hmm. That it's a concomitant. It means that the one implies the other. So they're coextensive. They have the same logical extension, but they are not synonymous. It is a necessary concomitant because it would be meaningless to use the term thing if existence, whether mental or extra-mental, I already said this as well, is not necessarily associated with it. Okay, this point will become very significant later on, as Marmura says, because he's going to introduce this idea that non-existence is not a thing. And that, again, addresses a group of the Mu'tazila who said that al-ma'dum is a shay, that the non-existent is a thing. All right? So you have to read these things closely, and a lot of these footnotes are very useful. Now, here he says that in paragraph 9, and here there's another footnote at the end, very end of the paragraph. We'll deal with the footnote first. So he says that the term thing, ash-shay, the thing, is, or some kind of equivalent, is found in all languages. Okay? And it indicates some other meaning. What does he mean by that? He says, to everything there is a reality by virtue of which it is what it is. Here he's pointing to the idea of quiddity. Mm-hmm. Thus the triangle has a reality in that it is a triangle, and whiteness has reality in that it is whiteness. It is that which we should perhaps call proper existence, not intending by this the meaning given to affirmative existence. For the expression existence is also used to denote many things, one of which is the reality a thing happens to have. Thus, the reality a thing happens to have is, as it were, its proper existence. And proper existence is al-wujudu al-khassu lish-shay. In Arabic, he has وَالشَّيْءُ وَمَا يَقُومُ مَقَامَهُ قَدْ يَدُلُّ بِهِ عَلَى مَعْنًى آخَرْ فِي اللُّغَاتِ كُلَّهَا فَإِنَّ لِكُلِّ أَمْرٍ حَقِيقَةً هُوَ بِهَا مَا هُوَ. So you see the mahiyya, quiddity is coming in here. Then he introduced the example of the triangle. فَلِلْمُثَلَّثِ حَقِيقَةٌ أَنَّهُ مُثَلَّثٌ وَلِلْبَيَاضِ حَقِيقَةٌ أَنَّهُ بَيَاض وَذَلِكَ هُوَ الَّذِي رُبَّمَا سَمَّيْنَاهُ الْوُجُودَ الْخَاصَّ وَلَمْ نَرِدْ بِهِ مَعْنَى الْوُجُودَ الْإِثْبَاتِ فإن لفظ الوجود يدل به أيضا على معان كثيرة منها الحقيقة التي عليها الشيء فكأنه ما عليه يكون الوجود الخاص للشيء. Again, if you go to page 380 6, footnote 6. He uses a Latin term here, so the footnote has to be about proper existence. Al-wujud al-khas lish-shay. He says this is what's called in Latin esse proprium. In this historically significant passage, and the discussion that follows, writes Marmura, Avicenna identifies the proper existence of something with its quiddity, differentiating it from what he calls affirmative existence, al-wujud al-ithbati. Entailed in this is the distinction between quiddity and thatness, al-mahiyya wal-inniyya. He refers you to another footnote, note 1.1, section 1.1, note 1, above, he says. Now here he says, in isagage, that means isaruji. Isaruji, but Ibn Sina never used the title isaruji in Arabic. This means al-madkhal.
Yeah.
Al-madkhal means, so he's got 1.2, so he would say that would be what? Book 1, section 2, al-maqalat al-ula, al-fasl al-thani, and he says page 15, that's to the Cairo edition. That's his intro to logic. So there Ibn Sina states that quiddities exist either in external reality or in the mind, but that they have a consideration in themselves, simply in terms of what they are, where the idea of existence, or to be more precise, of affirmative existence, al-wujud al-ithbati, is excluded. What does he mean? Marmura explains further. He says, existence is not included as a constituent of quiddity. Very important. So quiddity and existence are two different notions. And so in the madkhal, he again says isagage here, 1.6, that's al-maqalat al-ula, al-fasl al-sadis, page 34, safha 34. He also states that the triangle has as a necessary concomitant that the sum of its three angles should equal two right angles, not by the reason of the two kinds of existence, that is mental and extramental, but simply because it is a triangle. In other words, the haqiqah of the triangle, the thing that makes it what it is, the mahiyya of the triangle, necessitates, by definition of triangle, that the sum of its angles equal qa'imatain, as they say in Arabic, or two right angles, or two right angles is 2 times 90 degrees is 180 degrees, right? So the sum of the angles of a triangle, by definition of a triangle, have to be 180 degrees. They have nothing to do with al-wujud al-aini or al-wujud al-dhihni. So that is independent of any existence. And of course we know that, strictly speaking, a triangle is only a mental notion. And anything which is what we call a triangle in the external world, we do so with some degree of, we should anyway, with some degree of reservation, in as much as there is no such thing as a perfect triangle in the external world, because the line segments, right? A line has no width, but it is impossible to draw a line in the external world that has no width. I think you understand the point being made.
How would you define the term inniya and its difference from mahiyya?
How do you define?
Or not define, but what is the mafhum or the understanding of the word inniya? And it's.
I think here Wallahu alam, it's two notions of quiddity. You've got quiddity in the specific sense and quiddity in the general sense. And if you want to use quiddity in the very specific sense, it is the haqiqah of the shay. It's the inniyah. It's that which makes it what it is. Whereas quiddity in the general sense is fi jawabi ma huwa, ma yuqalu fi jawabi ma huwa, and that's why we say that Allah has no quiddity if we mean it in that sense, fi jawab ma huwa, because you can never get to the kun, or to the complete reality, the true nature of God. Whereas if you say that, well, no, it's that by which he is what he is, if you take the notion of inniyya, or the notion of quiddity in the more specific sense, then yes, God has a quiddity. Okay? So I think that's what it's pointing to. And there are a lot of terms like this. You have to be really careful. And there's another one which we haven't dealt with. Sometimes it depends on the context, and that's the word huwa or huwiya that you also come across sometimes in metaphysical works. At any rate, we don't want to become mired in these istilahat. Paragraph 10. Here he resumes what he was trying to say. And he basically says, look, there's this thing called quiddity. To resume, we say it is evident that each thing has a reality proper to it, namely its quiddity. Tamam? So that's paragraph 10. It's just 2 sentences long. Now here, if you might ask the question, which quiddity is he talking about? Actually, here he's talking about the thing that makes it what it is, that which makes it what it is. So this seems to be quiddity in the specific sense.
So he said
not
each
quiddity in the
thing
general
has a reality property, not each being has a reality property, namely its quiddity.
مو مشكلة. It's not a problem. ولكل شيء ولكل موجود لأن الشيئية تساوق الوجود والوجود يساوق الشيئية. ما يخالف. There's no problem here. Right?
مشكلة نيست.
Is that what they would say in Persian? I don't know how they would say it in Persian.
It's not my department in Persian.
إشكال نيست.
No, مشكلة نيست.
مشكلة نيست.
بعد ثاني. نعم. Okay, are we clear?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Number 11.
Okay, now I think I've missed a thing. I think I may have missed one point. Maybe there's 9. So in paragraph 11, maybe I would add. So in paragraph 11, he says, continuing on with the discussion of quiddity, وَذَلِكَ لِأَنَّكَ إِذَا قُلْتَ حقيقة كذا موجودة إما في الأعيان أو في الأنفس أو مطلقا يعمها جميعا. That is because if you said the reality of such a thing exists either in concrete things or in the soul or absolutely being common to both, this would have a meaning that was realized and understood. So he does seem to be pointing to wujud al-dhihni, mental existence, and external existence or existence in concreto, and then a general notion of existence which would encompass both. Let's see, what is the footnote? He has, after the word concrete things, corresponding to, in the Arabic, al-a'yan in paragraph 11. That's actually line 16 in the Arabic and line 30 in the English. There's a footnote number 7. Oh, he has some other footnote, 1.4, note 2 and 3 above. Well, let's see. I'm curious now. Yeah, things outside the mind. He's just clarifying.
Okay. Fil ayan means fil kharij. Over here?
What page?
Yeah, of course. Al-a'yan means fil kharij. We always say al-a'yan and al-adhan. So fil kharij, you can say in the external world. You can say in concreto. Okay? But he's going further with this.
I think it is like 385 water bridge. Al-Juziyah.
This is a long paragraph, number 11. Having introduced this notion of quiddity, he now wants to talk further about the interrelationship, the concomitant character of existence and thingness. Okay, and it gets pretty wordy here. If you go to page 25 of the English, line 10, is where he sums it all up. He's trying to say he's saying that mawjud and thing are not synonymous, but that they do go together. So on page 25 line 10, he says, this then is the meaning intended by the thing. This then is the meaning intended by the thing, ash-shay. The necessary concomitance of the meaning of existence never separates from it at all. Rather, the meaning of existence is permanently concomitant with it because the thing exists either in the concrete or in the mind. Here he says estimative faculty and the intellect. If this were not the case, it would not be a thing. I want you to hold that thought in your mind for a moment. Do you understand what is being said here? The Arabic is فَالشَّيْءُ يُرَادُ بِهِ هَذَا الْمَعْنَى. صفحة 25 سطر رقم 5. فالشيء يراد به هذا المعنى ولا يفارق لزوم معنى الوجود إياه البتة بل معنى الموجود يلزمه دائما لأنه يكون إما موجودا في الأعيان أو موجودا في الوهم والعقل فإن لم يكن كذا لم يكن شيئا.
So everything, either it's in the mind or it's in reality.
Yes.
Or it's not.
But before we go further, I have to make sure you understand that.
It wouldn't be a thing. It wouldn't be a thing. Okay.
The point he's getting to here is that just as we have al-wujud al-dhihni, mental existence, and al-wujud al-ayni al-khariji, existence in concreto, similarly, a thing either is a mental notion or is an actually externally existing thing. What if something doesn't exist?
Then it's not a thing.
Then it's not a thing. The best you can say it's a mental notion because we can talk about the non-existence. But he's going to make a more subtle point later. Let me just tell you what it is because he takes a long time to make it. He is trying to say, excuse me, that there are different categories of non-existent things as well. So when I just said non-existent things, so what do I mean? The absolutely non-existent is not a thing because nothing can be said about it. All right. So here's an example of a non-existent thing, which is a thing.
Like accidents.
I'm sounding maybe a little bit crazy now, but bear with me. Ramses II does not exist. He's dead. I know he existed. His corpse is there, but as a living being, he's dead. He's gone. He no longer exists. Okay. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon do not exist. They existed at one time. They have been devastated. They're gone. The Buddhas of Bamyan, we knew that they existed, but a certain anti-intellectual group of Sunni Muslims exploded them, right? The dinner which I am going to eat, inshallah, on January 27th, 2034. Does that exist? No. So there are things in the past, things in the future, which cannot really be said to exist, but they have some, we can speak about them in some meaningful way. There's a whole class of living things which don't exist. Dinosaurs, extinct plant life, but we know that they were here once because of the fossil record, for example. Mental notions also. Historical events, past historical events. The Vietnam War is over, right? Doesn't exist. Any kind of event in the past, it has transpired, it is gone. The Kennedy assassination, for example. But then there are things which completely and totally do not exist. Okay, what if you have just some notions in your mind? I mean, the brothers Karamazov do not exist. That's also the title of a book, right? But it's about a bunch of brothers, and by Fyodor Dostoevsky. That's a work of fiction. It doesn't matter if they've made it into a movie. Okay, that's one maybe that a lot of people, are not familiar with. But oh gosh, something from popular culture. I don't know. Darth Vader, Emperor Palpatine. If that was his name, I don't. Do they exist? No, they're. You can buy action figures and T-shirts, and there's a whole show, and you can convince yourself that they exist. But it's a work of fiction. So those things are non-existent, but they have a mental notion, but they have no athar khariji. I mean, it's a work of fiction doesn't have. The characters don't come to life. It's true. Yes, you can perform it as a play or make a movie adaptation of a book or what have you. We understand that. So then that has a depiction. There's some character who is playing Darth Vader. That's actually happening. But there is no such actual figure. You understand? But then if you talk about the absolutely non-existent, we can't say anything about it. It's not. Therefore, it's not a thing. So it has neither a wujud, it's just the absolutely non-existent. As a mental notion is there, but it has no referent whatsoever. And then there are other kinds of non-existences in the external world, like simple privations. Like you currently are not in your car. You're not at your house because you're here at Tajweed class, or sorry, Shifa class, right? or there is no gas in the car. There is no benzene. There is no petrol in the car because you've run out of gas. That's an understandable non-existent thing. You understand? So he's saying that if you talk about al-ma'doom mutlaqan, it doesn't qualify as a thing because it doesn't really have any meaningful mental notion, and it certainly doesn't in the external world.
So what do we have of it? We just have the concept of it, mafhum of it.
For us to negate it, but it's a nothing.
It's a nothing.
That's it.
So it doesn't have any wujud.
No. And people can make up all sorts of stuff. The one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. But mafi. There isn't. Maku. So he's going to go at great length. And then you have other stuff like fictional animals, like don't they say like the unicorn or the gryphon, al-anqa, sea morkh in Persian. Although in the case of the unicorn, I think that the unicorn actually did exist at one time. And it's just an animal which has gone extinct. I saw a study on this called The Unicorn in Lore and Legend, but I didn't buy it. I should have, The only book you regret is the one you didn't buy. So maybe the same thing could be said about the griffin. Maybe it was some sort of, or dragons. I don't know. I mean, did dragons ever exist? Who knows? But anyway, we're getting off the topic now. So let's refocus. So now he's getting into this whole business of the ma'doom. So this is what I have basically, what I just told you is set out here in paragraphs, in the succeeding paragraphs. So in paragraphs 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Now in 17, paragraph 17, page 26. According to those who uphold the view, which he has rejected above, there are matters in the assemblage of whatever is being informed about and known that in the state of non-existence have no thingness. So he says, وَعِنْدَ الْقَوْمَ الَّذِينَ يَرَوْنَ هَذَا الرَّأْيِ أن في جملة ما يخبر عنه ويعلم أمورا لا شيئية لها في العدم ومن شاء أن يقف على ذلك فليرجع إلى ما هذ به excuse me من أقاويلهم التي لا تستحق فضل الاشتغال بها. So he has a footnote here talking about this. Let's go to the footnote. It's footnote 9. That would be paragraph 17. That's line 26, 27, 28. Line 28 of the English. So the footnote is the footnote is where? 380. It's footnote 9, so it's 387. So Avicenna thinks that all of these sorts of opinions about the thingness, the thinghood of the non-existent are absurd. Why? Since, he says, Marmura says, in his estimation, in order to speak meaningfully about non-existence, one must have a thingness in mind to which there is reference. See all the examples I gave you. This discussion of non-existence is directed at a Mu'tazili view attributed to someone named al-Shahham. Al-Shahham. In other words, that non-existence is a thing. If you're interested in what al-Shahham actually said, there is a book called Maqalat al-Islamiyyin by al-Ash'ari. The best edition I've used, I mean, there are others, but the one that I'm familiar with is the edition by Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid in 2 volumes. And it's a useful book because what has happened in history is a lot of the works and so forth of these various early theologians have been lost, and you only have little statements, and these statements from them are preserved in works of this kind. And this work by al-Ash'ari is a very important one, and there you will find what al-Shahham had to say. And of course, Marmura has footnoted that. I don't know which edition he's referring to of the Maqalat. He says Maqalat 161. I don't know what that is. You'd have to refer to the bibliography. Al-Ghazali also talks about it in the Tahafut al-Falasifa. Marmura also translated the Tahafut al-Falasifa, and it was published in the same series, and that's what he's referring to here, where he says, see Al-Ghazali Incoherence. That's his translation. It says 216. I guess it's page 216 of his translation. Okay? In essence, what you have to understand is that the people who uphold this idea of the thinghood of the non-existent do not really understand properly what is meant by mental existence. That's what he's saying in paragraph, he's starting out to say in paragraph 18. These people have fallen into the error that they have because of their ignorance of the fact that giving information is about ideas that have an existence in the soul, even if these are non-existent in external things, where the meaning of giving information about these ideas is that they have some relation to external things. Now we get to the fun stuff. Thus, for example, if you said, the resurrection will be, so he's not really talking yet about al-ma'ad al-jismani or bodily resurrection, but he's kind of pointing in that direction. So obviously the resurrection is something which will happen in the future. It hasn't happened yet, so it doesn't exist, but it has some external idea. Like we already talked about, these examples. And then again, he talks about, does he give the past? You would have predicted will be, the pattern of reasoning applies correspondingly to matters relating to the past. So all of this is still this whole discourse on the non-thinghood of the non-existent. And the only sensible way in which you can speak of the thinghood of non-existing things is, for example, past, future, things that used to exist that don't exist, privations, absences, things like that. So in paragraph 19, he then concludes that now you have understood the way in which the thing, a-shay, differs from what is understood by the existent. So a-shay and al-mawjood, the existent and the thing, are not synonymous. They are coextensive, but through this discourse regarding the thinghood of the non-existent, you understand, or you should understand, it should be clear to you now what the difference is between the two terms. And moreover, that they are concomitants of one another. Paragraph 20. This is a reference to intermediate ontological states. Paragraph 20. Now on 386, I think he even writes a footnote to that effect. in which case I will refer you to the footnote. You both attend my Tajreed class, so you already know about this. Where is the footnote? 11. Page 387, footnote 11. Here Avicenna has as his target another Mu'tazilite doctrine, the doctrine of states, al-ahwal. I call them intermediate ontological states, intended as a solution to the problem of affirming God's eternal attributes without infringing on his utter unity, a doctrine associated with the Mu'tazilite theologian Abu Hashim al-Jubba'i, but also Abu Ali, his son, as well. According to this doctrine, when one describes God as a knower, for example, what is being affirmed is simply a state that differentiates him from a non-knower. This state can only be understood in terms of the divine essence, but it is not a positive attribute, an ontological entity. Accordingly, it would be improper to speak of it as either existing or non-existing. So this is absolutely repudiated by pretty much everybody else. It's certainly repudiated by the peripatetic philosophers, al-Masha'iyun. It's rejected by others as well. The thing to understand is that there can be no intermediate state between affirmation and denial, between wujud and adam, and so the doctrine of the hal is just a complete chimera. It's a complete waste of time. And he just summarily rejects it here in paragraph 20. Okay. So now in paragraph 21, here he says that existent, mawjud, is not a genus, and that it is not predicated in an equal fashion of whatever comes under it. Yet it has a meaning agreed on with respect to priority and posteriority. This is an allusion to the Masha'i doctrine, the peripatetic understanding of tashkikul wujud, by which it simply means wujud as a term applies analogically to existing things. He is not espousing the Sadrian doctrine, which I alluded to at the very beginning of this lecture, of a modulated, as my colleague Sajjad Rizvi would say, a modulated hierarchy, ontological hierarchy. This modulation of being, this kind of continuous scale from the highest, from, wajib al-wujud, from Allah as pure being, all the way down to the bottom of the ontological chain, the great chain of being in Islam. So he's not alluding to that, but he does say that wujud as a term applies analogically. Although he doesn't use the term tashkik. Let's be clear. He doesn't use that term here in Arabic. But he does say, إنه وإن لم يكن الموجود كما علمت جنسا ولا مقولا بالتساوي على ما تحته فإنه معنى متفق فيه على التقديم والتأخير. So he's saying it's not a genus, but it does apply it does apply in different ways to different things, and that's where he brings the notion of priority and posteriority. That's all he's saying. It's analogical. Then he shifts now to a new topic in paragraph 22. We're at the bottom of page 27. It may also prove difficult for us to make known the state of the necessary, the possible, and the impossible through ascertained definition. And we can make this known only through a sign. وقد يعسر علينا أن نعرف حال الواجب والممكن والممتنع بالتعريف المحقق أيضا بل بوجه العلامة. So again, you can only come up with a kind of descriptive at best characterization of necessity, contingency, and impossibility. They are indefinables. Now, I think it's clear enough. He goes off on this very long paragraph 22. In other words, how would you define the contingent or the possible? In other words, you would say that which is neither necessary nor impossible. Mm-hmm. How would you define the impossible?
Neither contingent nor necessary.
Yeah. So you see, it's always going to lead to circularity. And that's all he's saying in a lot of words in paragraph 22. So we're doing pretty well. We're going to finish on time. Paragraph 23. The case is similar with such statements as the impossible is that whose existence is not possible, or that whose non-existence is necessary, and so forth. The conclusion in paragraph 23 is the last sentence. All this, as you see, is clearly circular. A fuller exposure of this is something we have come across in the analytics. Analytics. What is analytics? I think that's Kitab al-Qiyas. And he'll give in the footnote, there's a footnote here, footnote 12. I think that should be Kitab al-Qiyas, if I'm not mistaken. They always like to bring the English name for the Greek, for the portion of Aristotle's logical works in Greek.
It's interesting. Yeah. In Sina uses the word anulutiqa. He doesn't say Kitab al-Qiyas. Yeah,
that's normal. That's not unusual. There were maybe he means maybe he's referring to the analytics of Aristotle himself then, because he wouldn't refer to his own book that way. I stand corrected. In Arabic, yes, sometimes they would refer to the different abwab of logic by those Greek terms they were known. Rhetorica, analutiqiya.
Well, Marmura in footnote 12
so
for analytics, he says it's Avicenna syllogism.
Then why did he use that? That's weird. That's what I would have thought. Okay, so maybe he does say that about his own works. Fine. يعني لا مشاحة في الاصطلاح. If you want to use that, that's fine. So the conclusion then is that it is not possible to define necessity, impossibility, and contingency, for contingency you could also say possibility, because all such attempts at definition will always lead to some sort of circularity. At the same time, he says that here too there is some sort of أولوية, if we may say that. So that's why he says على أن أولى هذه الثلاثة في أن يتصور أولا هو الواجب. Nonetheless, of these three, in other words, of necessity, contingency, or the necessary, the contingent, and the impossible, the one with the highest claim to be first conceived is the necessary. This is because the necessary points to the assuredness of existence. وذلك لأن الواجب يدل على تأكد الوجود والوجود أعرف من العدم. Existence being better known than non-existence. لأن الوجود يعرف بذاته. This is because existence is known in itself. والعدم يعرف بوجه ما من الوجوه بالوجود. Existence is known in itself, whereas non-existence is in some respect or another known through existence. We saw this at length in our various examples already when discussing the non-thinghood or non-thingness of the non-existent. So now we get to the repudiation of the bringing back into existence of the non-existent. So it seems my list is okay. Yeah. We could add maybe a ninth somewhere here around my point number 5. Maybe after 4 and 5, the notion of mental existence. Although he doesn't really dwell on it too much. He just kind of points to it, and he uses that in his discussion of the non-existent not being a thing. So that could be maybe the one thing to add, if you like. I'm just going to make a note for myself as well.
In between 4 and 5.
Yes, between 4 and 5. Between 4 and 5 in our list. Okay. Now in paragraph 25, there's 25, 26, and 27 to go. In paragraph 25, from our explaining these matters, he doesn't really say explaining. He says, وَمِن تَفْهِيمِنَا هَذِهِ الْأَشْيَاء يَتَّضِحُ لَكَ بطلان قول من يقول إن المعدوم يعاد. Wow. From our explanation of all that's gone before, it will become clear to you that it is false for someone to say the non-existent can be brought back into existence, because it is the first thing about which information is given in terms of existence. وذلك No, إن المعدوم لأنه أول شيء مخبر عنه بالوجود. This is because if the non-existent were to be brought back into existence, then there would necessarily be a difference between it and that which is similar to it. If that which is similar to it were to exist in its place. If only similar, it would not be identical with it, because it is not the thing that had ceased to exist, this latter in its state of non-existence being other than the former. Okay, this is all he's saying here. Let me just summarize it. You can read, what he says here, but let's make our point with an example. Again, we can use an example from popular culture, but presumably this could actually be pulled off. Presumably, I kind of am skeptical, but you have heard of this novel by Michael Crichton called Jurassic Park. Okay, so the dinosaurs have gone extinct. So if we could actually find some
promoting Jurassic Park 2 now.
Could we, if we found some genetic material in some sort of a fossilized mosquito encased in amber somewhere, clone, grow, from that something like a triceratops or a whatever, a tyrannosaurus, I don't know. Okay, let's say we did. Is it the same thing? Of course, in this case, it's a biological application of biological science and technology. So you actually have some genetic material and then you just grow it, all right? So it's not really a ma'doom. But let's say we could somehow bring back something from the past, or something which completely does not exist anymore. Is it the same? Ibn Sina would say, no, it's not. It's just a replica. It's not exactly the same, because you have to understand, what for him you have a mawjood, and if you have an existing thing, especially if it's a substance or an artifact. Remember, an artifact is a thing which a stapler is an artifact, right? It's something that's been assembled, or a bed is an artifact. But if you have some actually existing some sort of substance, it is subject to, and an artifact as well is subject to the accidents. And one of those accidents is time, place is another, and so forth. So if by some extraordinary act of sorcery, a'udhu billah, if we could bring Napoleon Bonaparte here and interview him, is that Napoleon Bonaparte? Or is it a replica?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're bringing him back from death isn't...
So this is the problem. So he hasn't said this here anywhere, but it seems that he's making this point because he's not too convinced
as far as
about bodily resurrection. So the soul survives, but the body is gone. So does the actual body come back? And of course, many of the theologians of Islam.
What's the verse of the Quran they use? Surah Yasin.
There's a lot. من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم. خلق عليم هنا. I think that's it.
No.
So, what do you have to say about that?
I don't know.
So that's what he seems to be saying, that it's not possible. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون وليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العظيم. So that's the thing. So that's the idea that, well, if you're going to bring something back, it's not really the thing. It's not that original thing because it's doesn't have its place and its time. So if there is a resurrection body, is it the exact same body? See, that's actually a valid question. That's actually a valid question because let's ask the question, are you the same person that you were 10 years ago?
Not even 10 minutes ago.
Physically speaking, no. Right? So you have a child at age 10 and age 5, a newborn, and you have a newborn, then you have a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old and a toddler and then a teenager and then an adult and then an old man and then a corpse. So in which condition are you going to be resurrected? Are you going to be resurrected as, let's say somebody dies at the age of 100, mashallah. So when they're going to be resurrected, they're going to be resurrected as a young man, as a javan, or as a buddha. Or is he going to be resurrected as an old decrepit fellow? So which is it? So I think that's maybe part of what's happening in those sections. There are those who have said that there is a resurrection body, but it's nothing like the physical body. Wallahu alam. And in the final analysis, even if the really strong people of the theological view that no, this is what the Quran means and this is what it says, I mean, if they would also be a little bit honest about it, they would have to admit that they really don't know, and that theirs is also an interpretation. And the philosophers, like Ibn Sina, theirs is also an interpretation. In the final analysis, we really don't know exactly what it would be like. And I think the best explanation is that these are metaphorical statements. These are metaphorical statements. I mean, it's also like what's in Jannah. Do you really think you're all it's just going to be a big party? Like in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, يطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون بأكواب وبارق وكأس من معين لا يصدعون عنها ولا ينزفون وفاكهة مما يتخيرون ولحم طير مما يشتهون وحور عين كأمثال اللؤلؤ المكنون. ये सब होगा वहाँ. यकीनन होगा.
But for the Lord,
are we going to have all of that stuff there? Yes. But what does it mean? Does it mean that the ghilman there that are walking around with these glasses with some sort of a drink in it, is that the situation that like what we have in the world? Or is it more like back in it's in Surah Al-Baqarah, وَأُتُوا بِهِ مُتَشَابِهًا.
That's a key verse.
That's a key verse. So either you acknowledge that there is such a thing as metaphor, and that spiritual realities are often conveyed through metaphorical language, or you don't. And if you don't, then you reduce everything and spirituality and posthumous states and everything to a kind of material level. You are, in a sense, a kind of a materialist if you uphold that kind of a view.
But the question is, how do the falasifa interpret a verse such as the one we recited from Surah Al-Yasin?
It's figurative.
I mean, what is the symbolism behind it?
Well, if you refer to a dead person, typically what happens to everyone who isn't a prophet or a great saint or an imam, the body decays. But usually what remains is some sort of a skeleton. You can find those skeletons. They might fossilize, they may not fossilize, but there are remains, human remains, which are found all over the world, whether they've been mummified or not. And so when you say who will give life to dead bones, I mean, when you say bones, it's a way of referring to a dead person. It may, in many contexts, it may be extremely impolite, but in literary sort of we understand you could refer to.
And this literary usage was there in classical Arabic.
And the literary usage is there in classical Arabic. Mm-hmm. And so it's simply saying that who will bring the dead to life. Mm-hmm. Do you understand? So, also when you say who is going to bring the dead to life, what happens when you die is that you do have physical remains. And the soul leaves those physical remains behind. But those physical remains right after death are very, very important. That's why we have funeral rites. In all religions in the world, there's some sort of funeral ritual. And then that body is interred in the ground. At least for us, the Hindus burn and so forth. But there is some sort of ritual that has to be done. But the soul is gone. The soul has departed. Where has the soul gone? So death is just a moving from one plane of existence, so to speak, to another. And the physical corpse remains behind, but the soul goes elsewhere, as so to speak. And in Islam, we say it's the barzakh, it's the in-between state. And whatever is going to happen to that person, whether they're of the Jannah, the garden, or the Nar, of the fire, then some degree of that punishment or enjoyment begins in the barzakh state, in the grave. But we don't see it. You could go and dig up 100 graves right now. Say, oh, well, we don't see anything happen here. There's no snakes, there's no fire, there's no scorpions, all the kind of things that are said there. Now, maybe you can perceive that on some other level. But that soul is there. So what does it mean to bring that person back to life if the soul is there already? You understand? So presumably the soul is then joined to some other sort of body. And that's what the resurrection means. Otherwise, the soul is there. We don't perceive those souls, but some people do. Some people have great spiritual insight. They can go walk through a graveyard and tell you what's happening. And people have said that these kind of stories are there in our literature. But to say that resurrection is just going to be, everyone is going to be resurrected at age, 25 or something like this, and that they will be in their physical form. You can make that claim, but that is a hard claim to maintain, I would say, philosophically. And I think it's more honest simply to say that, well, we actually really don't know. So I'm not trying to say that I know, but the only thing I am saying is that the philosophers have a point when they say that you have to take this metaphorically. No. Wallahu a'lam.